Hello. So today we're going to be covering the general features of the sensory and motor systems of the body and going through the pathways through transmission of motor and sensory information to and from the central nervous system. All right, so the first two systems that we're going to be going over today are going to be the sensory systems. So these pathways are going to be that dorsal column pathway here and a spinothalamic or anterolateral column. So the dorsal column pathway, that is going to cover our sensory information such as discriminate touch, pressure, vibration, things like that, and proprioception. All right, and let's go to the spinothalamic or anterolateral column. That is going to relay sensory information such as pain, temperature, things like light touch. And we'll kind of go over why those relay that different information and kind of how they are different, how they cover different processes to relay that specific information. Before we get started, I do want to go over how they both follow a very general pattern with the neurons and how they relay that information. So both the dorsal column and the spinothalamic or anterolateral column, they follow the general pattern from first order neuron, second order neuron to third order, and then to the fourth order neuron. All right. So let's begin by looking specifically at the relay of information through the dorsal column pathway here. So we have this nice, beautiful diagram that I have drawn here. And let's start by going over a few of our structures here and labeling those so we have a general idea of where we want to start. All right. So the first thing that we're going to go here and label right now is going to be that primary somatosensory cortex here. All right. So right up there at the top, kind of near the outside of the brain, we're going to kind of work down with our labeling here. So the next thing that we're going to go through here, kind of right there in the middle of that drawing of the brain here, kind of where those two pink circles are, that's going to be that ventral posterior thalamus. And then as we're working down here, we've got the midbrain there, the pons, upper medulla, and then down a little bit further, lower medulla. And then we have our cervical and lumbar spinal cord at the bottom. Down a little bit further, lower. Now that we have a good idea and we're kind of oriented with our structures here, let's go ahead and discuss that dorsal column pathway. All right, so see right here, I'm just going to use that cervical spine right there just for that example, and then I'll draw in that lower limb spinal or the spinal cord after that. But we'll see right here that it starts, that first order neuron starts right there at that dorsal root ganglions where they have bodies. And then from there, they'll ascend ipsilaterally to the medulla. All right. And then at the medulla here, the first order neurons are going to kind of synapse on those second order neurons here, which I'll label for you. And then they will decussate and cross that midline there. So I'll show you where that is. All right. And then the third step here, this is going to be where those second order neurons ascend to the contralateral thalamus, and they're going to synapse onto those third order neurons right here in that area of the thalamus. All right. And just to give you some more information here, that word decussation means that somatosensory information from one side of the body is received in that contralateral side of the thalamus. And then finally, the third order neurons will ascend to that somatosensory cortex here in that outside area of the brain that we've labeled earlier. And they're going to synapse with those fourth order neurons. Into that somatosensory cortex here in that outside area of the brain that we've labeled neurons. All right. Now let's go over that anterolateral or that spinothalamic system. Remember, this is that system for neurons, for neurons, for neurons. All right. Now let's go over that anterolateral or that spinothalamic system. Remember, this is that system that's used for transmitting information regarding pain, temperature, and light touch. All right. So where this one is a little bit different here is those first order neurons, they have cell bodies in the dorsal horn, which is different than the dorsal column pathway where they start in that dorsal root ganglia. So like I said, in the spinothalamic, they'll be in that dorsal horn, and they'll synapse on the thermoreceptors and nioreceptors of the skin, and then synapse onto the second order neurons in the spinal cord. All right, and then once in that spinal cord, that's where the first order neurons are going to synapse on the second order neurons, which desiccate and cross the midline where they ascend to the thalamus. That's kind of that big difference here between the spinothalamic system and that dorsal column, is that they have to desiccate and cross the midline earlier. It's important sensory information, so they need to make sure that they relay that information as quickly as possible. So that's why they are desiccating earlier here in this system. From here, they're going to be in the thalamus. Once in the thalamus, the second order neurons are going to synapse onto the third. And then just like that dorsal column, the third order neurons are going to ascend to that somatosensory cortex and then synapse with the fourth order neurons. And then here I've just included a view of the dorsal column and the spinothalamic column pathway kind of side by side, so you can kind of see that difference and that difference with the desiccation and kind of where they're going to and how they're moving through the body into the brain. All right, so now that we've gone on over the dorsal and the spinothalamic column, we're going to cover our descending pathways, specifically the corticospinal tract. So what this does is it carries motor information down from the brain through the spinal cord to the muscles. This system is composed of upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. So the upper motor neurons, these are those cell bodies in the brainstem of the cerebral cortex, and they help with control of voluntary muscle activity, maintaining posture and equilibrium, muscle tone, and reflex activity. The lower motor neurons, they're a little bit different. They're going to be what's innervating those skeletal muscles, and they form that final common pathway where they terminate. All right, so here you can see we have a pretty similar view to when we looked at those ascending pathways here, just a little bit different there. So I'll label a couple of these areas for you. So first of all, this is the right, and this is that left side of the body. And then here is that primary motor area of the cerebral cortex. And we're going to work our way down here. This is that pons, right in this area. That is the left lateral corticospinal tract. And then here is that right anterior corticospinal tract. Moving a little bit more inferior, we see that spinal nerve. And then we see kind of those roots and horns of that spine. So now that we have everything that we need labeled, let's go through this descending pathway, beginning with the brain here, more specifically the motor cortex. This is where upper motor neurons will begin, and they'll start to send those signals down through the brain. So you'll see kind of moving down there, all right, and out of the brain, and then we'll see where they cross over or decussate again, you see that word again, where they'll travel through the brainstem and reach the medulla. And as they reach that medulla, almost all the fibers cross over to the other side of the body this is where we really come to that main focus on how the brain controls that contralateral side of the body here. So like I said, the fibers are crossing over as they release that medulla, almost all of them there, which is kind of shows us how they control that other side of the body. And then as we keep moving down right here, we'll see how they synapse in that spinal cord with the lower motor neurons in that like gray column of the spinal cord here. So moving through that tract here, and then we get to that last step here, which is where the muscles are activated. And this is where those lower motor neurons get engaged here. So you can see right here, that's where those lower motor neurons are. And then as you see here, it's going to be sending that information out to those skeletal muscles to cause them to contract. All right. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today while we went over those ascending and descending pathways of the body here. I've got all three of those there for you here. That spinothalamic system, the dorsal column, as well as that corticospinal tract and those descending pathways. All right. So we covered how that information is sent to and from the brain, how it crosses over, causing us to be able to control our contralateral sides of the body. And I just hope you have a good understanding of those ascending and descending pathways